Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, where our goal is to keep you informed, inspired, and a little entertained on all things diabetes. The information contained in this program is based on the experience and opinions of the Integrated Diabetes Services clinical team. Please discuss any changes to your treatment plan with your personal healthcare provider before implementing. Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. I'm Gary Scheiner, and I'm your host for today. We're going to be discussing the illusion of glucose control today, and I am delighted to be joined by Riva Greenberg. Riva is a multi-time author, columnist, and the blogger. So if there's anything you want to know about diabetes, chances are she has written about it. And, the topic, about the illusion of glucose control is kind of an interesting one. There's certain terminology we try not to use in the diabetes world nowadays. Like, we tend not to use the word diabetic, try to avoid that if we can. We also don't use the term compliant. That's one we try to stay away from. But the idea of control is another thing we're going to talk about today, and whether that should be a taboo word or what we should use instead. But Riva, tell us a little more about yourself. Other than being the prolific writer, tell us about the real Riva.
Oh, God. Oh, no, that would take the entire hour. So let's just say I've had type 1 for 53 years. I got it in 1972. And I typically say, if I'm talking in front of a group, now you know how old I am, if you're quick. I got involved in this work about 25 years ago. I was at a bridge point in my advertising writing career, and I wanted to do something to actually help people. And I went to a diabetes educator for the first time after having had diabetes for 32 years because I was getting married that year. And I don't know, this idea bubbled up. Maybe I could help people with diabetes. And since I was a writer by trade, I started out writing articles, writing for various diabetes publications, 7 years with the Huffington Post. Of course, you can go back and look for those articles online. They're all classic. And I started going to conferences to meet people, and then started getting invited to them to speak as a speaker. Wrote 3 books along the way, as you said, a blog, Diabetes Stories. So the last few years, actually before the pandemic, I was going around the world presenting largely to health professionals, diabetes educators and nurses, about a way of working with their patients, people with diabetes, because I think patients is also a possible taboo word, that I called the flourishing approach, which is very different than our conventional treatment approach. And so I was lecturing about that and running workshops. And the most recent things I've written is, as you said, about the absolute fact that we cannot control blood sugar.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a bit more. But I had to remind you, I think we talked about this before, because besides having had diabetes for many decades, we have something else in common. That before we got involved in the diabetes landscape, we were both copywriters for ad agencies. I don't know if you knew that about me, but
I did.
That was what I did when I was going to grad school, helped to pay the bills.
Wow.
I don't know, like you, I just kind of had a knack for writing, especially creative writing, and I used that to make ends meet.
That's
stuff
important.
like that. So tell me, why do you feel that diabetes cannot be controlled?
Well, we should say diabetes cannot be controlled and blood sugar cannot be controlled. And there's a couple of very fundamental reasons. One is neuroscience, biology, how our body works. We're biological. We can't control our blood pressure. We can't control our heartbeat. And yet we have this idea that we can control our blood sugar. But as a biological organism, our blood sugar is a symphony along with all our metabolic processes. And everything affects everything else. It's not like, well, let's see, right now I'm 95. Now, it'd be great if I could stay there for the whole hour, but I can't predict that. And I can't really make it happen with accuracy. So that's one reason. We're biological organisms.
Is it fair to say that we can influence our glucose
Absolutely.
levels?
Absolutely. And it's not a sexy word. And since we're both copywriters, we know what that means. But influence is much more true than control, right? And I'm going to come back to that. Let me just tell you the second reason why you really can't control it at all. And that's the pure unpredictability of life. I may decide how I want today to play out, but I really don't know how it's going to play out. Or when I go to a restaurant and I'm a good girl and I pre-bolus, and then I get told that the meal's going to be delayed because they ran out of what I ordered. The pure unpredictability and complexity of life impacts us every day. And so those two factors are huge. And the idea of control, I believe, really came out of the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution, when medicine absorbed values from both of these revolutions. Like machine thinking is about accuracy and precision and cause and effect. But the human body doesn't work that way. The scientific revolution was about measurement and evaluation. And so we're constantly measuring and evaluating. And that's great, because I'm not against any of the tools we have. Thank God we have them. It's made my life a whole lot easier than it was
What are you using these
53
days
years
to,
ago.
we'll say, what are you using to influence your glucose?
Well, I'm a minimalist. I use the Libre 3 CGM. I don't use a pump, and I never have. So I find that knowing where my blood sugar is and whether or not it's going up and down is much more valuable to me than a pump as a delivery system. Maybe it's because I'm so used to shots, but it's sort of like, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Worked for 53 years.
Yeah, pretty much as best it can. And I'm a little bit nervous about being dependent on a pump, right? So when I take injections, I know how much insulin's going in my body. Well, more or less. See, there's another thing. Scar tissue, whatever. Maybe I don't know how much insulin I'm getting, but I feel a little bit more assured. But I have said, if they make a pump and it's the size of a credit card, I'll try it.
Far from that. Have you ever read Adam Brown's book, Bright Spots and Landmines?
I have.
Yeah. He has that table in there of 42 factors that influence glucose. And everyone thinks about that. They just think, oh my goodness, that's a lot. But he missed a lot of important stuff. There's more than what he had listed there.
What rolls off the top of your head that he missed?
Well, time of day really has an influence. I do a lot of work with athletes and people who exercise, and the time of day the activity takes place affects the glucose response to the activity. So that's one. And air travel, learning now, especially pump users, insulin moves in their pumps in and out of the body sometimes when altitude changes, cabin pressure changes, et cetera. We're working on an updated list of factors that influence glucose to build on the work that he did. But yeah, there are an almost unlimited number of factors that are influencing our glucose at any moment in time. And I remember years ago, I heard Michael Bliss, he wrote the book about the discovery of insulin, and I heard him speak. And he said that at any given moment in time, there's really only about 5 grams of glucose in the bloodstream. And you think about how much we're adding to it and detracting from it with the energy we burn. And we're trying to balance like a teaspoon of sugar. That's all it is. It's a teaspoon worth of sugar that's in the bloodstream. Meanwhile, we're eating 60 grams at a time. We're burning dozens of grams with the activities we're doing. And we're trying to keep this teaspoon nice and level. So yeah, influence is a much better term, I think, than...
So Gary, why do you think, since it seems common sense when we talk about not being able to, quote unquote, control blood sugar, why do you think doctors have repeated that mantra ad nauseum?
I think physicians, for the most part, come from a different type of a learning paradigm, and they're thinking of things from purely a medical clinical standpoint and not maybe thinking about the psychological impact of the words that are used. The compliant is a great example. That's a term that a lot of healthcare providers still use. They call someone with diabetes who might miss a shot or delay their insulin once in a while, non-compliant, not realizing the impact that has on the person they're saying that to or calling that, and not realizing the constant workload that diabetes imposes on those of us who live with it and the frustrations and struggles that come with it. So tell me what you think. I mean, do you think people can develop an unhealthy relation? Yeah, Riva, I think physicians come from a different learning paradigm. I mean, they're trained from a medical clinical standpoint and may not think about the effect that their words have on their patients. Their choice of words can make a big difference. And you're a wordsmith like none other, and you understand the impact that terminology can have. And a word like compliant, that people are often labeled as compliant by their healthcare provider if they don't take their insulin on time, or if they eat something that's out of the ordinary or not part of their meal plan. But, we're human beings and mistakes are going to be made. And sometimes we just get tired of it too. It's such an overwhelming thing that we're dealing with constantly. Do you think that the words can cause people to have an unhealthy relationship with their diabetes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you're always told to control your blood sugar, then how can you not feel like you're failing? Because it's an impossible goal. And a lot of people who feel like they're failing start backing off on their management because that's an uncomfortable feeling that I'm failing. And I know people also just sort of stop managing. And that's a very dangerous track to go down. I was doing a workshop at Camp Nagetta in New Jersey for adults with type 1. And I was presenting this idea that we can't control our blood sugar. And I had a woman start to sob with relief because nobody had ever told her that before. And she held herself so accountable for something that was impossible to achieve. I think we're much better off to tell people the truth. That, yes, you can learn your patterns, how you do with food and exercise. You can, God willing, I imagine most of the people listening to this have CGMs. You can see how they affect your blood sugar, and you can start experimenting, doing small experiments to see how food and exercise affect things. Notice how stress affects you or bad night's sleep, menstruation. And, then if you have the relaxation, that sounds like a funny word, but if you have the calm along with the confidence that I don't have to get the perfect number, there's no such thing. And in fact, it used to drive me crazy that every meter commercial always showed 106. Just to drive me insane.
If they had a meter that said, 283,
Right.
I would buy that meter. That's a real meter.
Absolutely. Actually, I was once at the Accu-Check factory, and, all their meters were lined up there, and they were the 106 on the box, and I would like. So if you know that this is a ridiculous, achievable goal, controlling blood sugar, but you can influence it, Gary's sexy word, then you begin to feel a calm and a confidence to just do what you need to do when you see whatever number you see.
Like the guilt accumulates. I look at my sensor now, it's saying I'm 191. I just ate and it's starting to trend down, but I look at that 191 and I feel a little guilty. Like, what did I do wrong? And it accumulates over time. All those little guilt hits throughout the day.
It's baked in, isn't it?
What's a better way to approach it?
Well, I'll be honest. There are times I feel the same. Like, oh my God, I'm over 200. What is happening? And of course, there has to be some sense of, I did this, right? Because I'm the only one here making all these decisions. And I know better, but I don't know if it's that biological fight or flight or just because I've heard it for decades, whatever it is. But something that's good to remember is you're responsible for your effort, not your outcome.
I love that. Responsible for your effort, not your outcome. I see so many patients who become overly perfectionistic about their diabetes management. I do my best to explain to them that the benefits only go so far. There's a certain point at which you don't gain any more from tightening your glucose anymore. But not everybody buys into it. But that perfectionism, I feel it starts hitting a person's quality of life, because now they're spending far too much time and energy focusing on glucose levels rather than playing with their kids or going out and doing something fun. They're thinking about their diabetes too much. They're micromanaging to such an extent. How do you feel that your approach would help someone like that?
Word from our sponsor. Byram Healthcare understands that managing diabetes isn't one size fits all. With a full range of CGMs, insulin pumps, and diabetes supplies from top brands, Byram makes it easy to get what you need, hassle-free, shipped right to your door. And Byram's team of experts helps navigate insurance so you can focus on living your best life. Ready for better diabetes care? Visit byramhealthcare.com/podcast or call 866-692-8024 and select option 3. And now, back to our program.
It's definitely, again, this idea that we have to come back to, you can't control, but you can influence. I mean, it's a soundbite, but it's really what people should hang on to. You can't control, but you can influence, and you're responsible for your effort, not your outcome. Just, the other thing is, and I guess I could speak to this having type 1 53 years. If for the most part I'm in range, then I think, speaking to your perfectionists, we have a heightened sense of catastrophe when a quote unquote bad number comes up. But these occasional or semi-occasional out-of-range numbers are natural to the process of influencing blood sugar. It's just natural. And, if I can only speak to myself, for myself as one person, but, I'm, even without a pump, I'm in range about 90% of the time because I'm diligent. That's just my nature. And I have some, I guess we call comorbidities, but not complications, right? And this is to be expected for someone who's lived with type 1 diabetes more than 40, 50 years.
Yeah. I like the words that you used before. Some of the terminology that we also refrain from now is that glucose levels are bad or good, that glucose levels are high or low. We try to stay away from that and talk about the range, in range, above target, below target, because then, it's more of an objective outcome. It's not a judgmental term. It's not a qualitative term. It's very matter of fact that right now my glucose is slightly above target, better than saying it's high or it's bad. You like that?
Yeah, of course. We don't want to attach labels like that. And maybe
Yeah.
there's also, again, this idea that some of these medical values came out of the machine age. Everything was about precision, accuracy, perfectionism, which is great if you break your arm. If you break your arm and you need an operation, I want those things.
Mm-hmm.
But living with a chronic condition that's not only my body, but also my emotions and my psyche, and moving through life every day, they really aren't helpful. What's more helpful is this idea that we're in flow, that our body is always in flow, that moving through life, we're in flow. There's an expression, I don't know if it's Buddhist, that you never step in the same river twice, because when you step in the second time, even if it's a moment later, you're different somehow than you were a moment before. The way the river is flowing is different somehow than it was a moment before. There's something to be said for adopting an attitude of flow, right? That you flow with your numbers rather than resist. Because when we resist, like we see a 250, then we make it worse inside our body. The stress hormones, the self-blame, the torture, right? But if we see that number and we say, well, the first thing I try to do when I see a number I don't like, yes, I'm human, or expect, is how did I end up there? And lots of times I know how, but sometimes I don't. But if we have an attitude of flow, then we don't resist, we don't fight, we don't beat ourselves up. We just take a breath, say, okay, I get it. Yikes. Well, this is what I'm going to do now. So much kinder to yourself than beat the crap out of yourself, which is not going to help.
I feel better just listening to you say that, Riva. I truly do. Do you feel that modern technology in the diabetes space is making the self-perception of diabetes management better or worse? Are people becoming more comfortable with their diabetes care, or are they becoming more obsessed, more critical, more judgmental of themselves?
Yeah, it's not, it's not an either or. It's both, right? So I'm so grateful for my CGM. At the same time, I know there are lots of times I take more insulin because I see that arrow going up, and I shouldn't have done that. I should have waited. So it's more data. There's some burden in that. I'm grateful because there's more data. So it's both. But I think it really benefits people to somehow get back to this idea that there's a human being here. It's not just a condition or a disease that we're managing 24/7. It's a human being here that's also living a life. So cut yourself a little slack. I wonder if the fact that we have all these devices makes health professionals buy more into the myth that we can control our blood sugar. Because since I know what my number is in any moment, certainly now I can control it, right? But the same factors are still at play. It's just I know the number in the moment, but it doesn't mean I can control the next number.
What I like about the latest tech, and I'm talking specifically about the semi-automated insulin delivery systems, is that a person with diabetes can pretty much do what they've been doing all along, but have better outcomes. They can be in range more often, have fewer lows, not low, be below target and above target less often. That to me is a win. I love the fact that in almost every case we're able to achieve that, but it does come with some psychological play as well, where our expectations are maybe too lofty at times. What do you consider the key things that are at our disposal for influencing our glucose in a positive way?
Well, certainly we know what we eat probably has the biggest impact. I tend to be low carb. I've done that for years and years. And I once had a brunch, and everyone at the table had type 1, and I wasn't eating the bagel. And somebody got mad at me like I'm a sacrifice. I said, it's not a sacrifice for me. I'm so used to it. I don't eat them anymore. It doesn't bother me. But if I want something occasionally, I have it. So certainly what we eat, low carb works for me. And, people don't really talk about this, but routine. If I eat very similarly day to day, and I exercise similarly, that gives me a little edge at what I can expect, right? Because I
Tevye
know,
called tradition.
yeah, well, as soon as I go somewhere and I'm out of my routine, my numbers are bouncing, in a way that's very non-typical for me. And I also think it's really helpful if people have someone else in their life who understands type 1. And who really understands this idea that you can't control it. I mean, that's important because if the people around you think you can control it, that's pressure.
How long did it take for your husband to buy into that concept?
Well, the funny thing is we knew each other as friends for a dozen years before we got married. And he knew I had diabetes, but he really hadn't seen it close up. And he's a learner. So when I started checking my blood sugar on my meter back in the day, early in our marriage, he would want to stand there and watch what number came up. And at first I was mortified. And then I just understood this was his wanting to know and to help. So I let him stand there and I started giving him T1 University 101. And I'd say a year or two, probably, like everybody else thought there must be a silver bullet here that I haven't quite figured out yet after 32 years or whatever it was. But he's enormously supportive. And the one other thing I would recommend to people, for influencing it is to have a calming practice. It's great if you could do yoga or walk in nature, Tai Chi. I do Qigong, and I do somatics, which works with the stress in the body. I mean, when you think about it, every time we look at a number, it's like a little heightened tension, right?
That's right. The mood ring starts to turn dark right
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Or for myself, when I inject, every time I inject, my body must clench a little bit. So there must be, God knows how much tension stored in this poor body. So to have a relaxation practice, I think would be very
Yeah.
nurturing.
I've been coaching patients on that recently, especially those who are involved in competitive sports or who have to give presentations, things that tend to drive an adrenaline rush that drives the sugars up very high. Practicing relaxation exercises to calm that response, influencing the glucose in a different way than would normally occur. You describe, what you consider the strengths of your own management. I'm kind of the mirror image of that. I work out religiously. I'm really good at juggling my insulin and medications, using the technologies to the full effect. But when it comes to my diet, I take far too many liberties. Yeah, I mean, to me, 60 gram is a low carb meal for me.
Wow.
And I snack and I'm not very disciplined when it comes to my diet. And it shows, but I'm at a point where I consider my quality of life more important than just the numbers that show up on the screen. To me, we manage diabetes to have a good quality of life, the best quality of life possible. And if diabetes is keeping you from doing the things you enjoy and partaking in the things you like, that's taking away from quality of life. If you're using all your brain cells on glucose management and it's getting in the way of other things, that's a quality of life hit right there.
Yeah. But what you also make me think, of course, if we had another show, we could go into your eating, but we won't do it here.
We would need more than one show, trust me.
Yeah, I imagine. There's an idea out there that type 1s can do anything. Type 1s can do anything anybody else can. We're superheroes, yada, yada, yada. And it's a nice idea. At the same time, I think it's its own pressure. Like, it doesn't allow you to take the time you need when you need it. Like, you just had a low. I mean, low can be kind of not very serious for me, or a low can wipe me out for the rest of the day. And, if I just think I'm a superhero and I should be able to do anything anybody else does, where I'm going, that kind of puts some pressure on me not to allow myself to feel what it's like to live with a chronic, intensely self-managed condition 24/7.
Yeah. And high glucose can have the same high above target. See, I keep falling into that trap. If you're well above target, it can cause the same thing. It can wipe a person out. Got one last question for you. Looking back, you've lived with this for 53 years. If you could go back, what would you have done differently with your own diabetes management?
Wow, I don't think anybody's ever asked me that.
Is there anything you would have done differently? Would you have used different approaches? Would you have used different tools? Would your mindset have been any different at some point?
Well, of course, on the one hand, I have to say, I wouldn't have done anything differently because whatever I did led me here, and I'm very happy here. You introduced me to the Dexcom G4. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm. In Philly at a restaurant.
That's right. That's right. I might have looked at the benefits of technology earlier than I did.
Mm-hmm.
I might have gotten into low carb eating sooner than I did. I actually picked that up from the Diabetes Solution, Dr. Bernstein's Bible. And at that point, when he talked about low carb, I mean, I didn't go low carb to the extent that he talks about it. But when I did that, it changed everything. My insulin halved. And so I would have done that sooner had I known.
I hear that from a lot of people. A lot of people I see are hesitant to try something new, whether it's technology or a medication or even a management approach. The biggest regret they share is they didn't do it sooner. because they felt like their quality of life would have been better had they given it a try earlier. So I think one thing we can learn from that is that we have to be willing to try new things.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Yeah.
There's value to tradition. I give you that. I give you credit for that. A tradition helps, but if there is a better way of doing things, we got to give it a chance.
Yeah. And I think the other side of that is being comfortable with who you are and having a sense of what's for you, what's right for you, right? Not getting pressured by all the stuff around us, whether it's new technology, which some people probably feel pressured to do, or things.
Yeah. I want to try to just summarize some of your pearls of wisdom, and there have been many of them. One is that we don't control glucose levels. However, we can influence them. Life is driving our glucose levels in different directions every second, every minute, every hour of every day. We have the ability to influence, but not really control them. Also, that words do matter. We shouldn't use terminologies that make us feel guilty, make us feel like a failure. And keep it real, keep it honest. And you also said that we are responsible for our effort. We are not responsible for the outcomes, because the outcomes are largely beyond our control or our influence. We can learn from experience. We learn from patterns. We have to flow with what's going on. Our lives are changing all the time. What worked previously may not work now. The one constant in our lives, all of our lives, is change. Tradition and predictability, consistency can be an asset when it comes to diabetes management, but it's not for everybody. A person's quality of life matters more than anything. You think I caught most of the key points, or anything that I missed?
Yeah, but it's interesting listening to you say all this, which presumably I said. I realize sometimes some of wisdom just comes with age and experience, right?
So we encourage everyone to age as quickly as possible.
Age very quickly, because I don't know. It's funny. I mean, for me personally, I'm looking now at what's it like to be an older person with type 1 diabetes. There's been scant attention paid to that.
Yeah. As Mick Jagger said, what a drag it is getting old. It's got its benefits. You can get into movies cheaper, all kinds of discounts we get. But yeah, it comes with its share of challenges.
Yeah. And for your listeners, Gary, when you talked about a lot of people are perfectionists, and I was the same. Maybe it's worth asking yourself, what does perfection get you? Perfection itself is a vehicle of control, right? I want to be perfect so I can control everything. And it's a very one-sided thing. I'm either perfect or I'm nothing.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily an influencer.
No, nor flow.
Could be an influencer in a negative way.
Yeah, could be.
Well, Riva, thank you so much for joining me today. I learned quite a bit. I actually feel better about myself and my diabetes just having spent this time with you. We'll be sure to post the links to your blog on our show notes. And again, thank you for joining. I'm Gary Scheiner, reminding everyone out there to keep thinking like a pancreas.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks for tuning in to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast is brought to you by Integrated Diabetes Services, where experience meets expertise, passion meets compassion, and diabetes care is personal because we live it too. Our team of clinicians, all living with type 1 diabetes, understands the challenges firsthand. We're here to help no matter where you are in the world. From glucose management to self-care strategies, the latest tech, sports and exercise, weight loss, type 1 pregnancy, and emotional well-being, we've got you covered. We offer consultations in English and Spanish via phone, video chat, email, and text. Want to learn more? Visit integrateddiabetes.com or email info@integrateddiabetes.com to schedule a consultation. On behalf of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, I'm Gary Scheiner, wishing you a fantastic week ahead. And don't forget to think like a pancreas.